So, for today's episode, we're going to start right in on the Lovers, a card that goes by a few other names. First, it was originally in the Marseille decks, it was the Lover, usually representing one lover, making a choice between two different women. It was also called the Two Roads and the Ordeal. The Hermetic title, though, the Hermetic titles are Children of the Voice and Oracle of the Mighty Gods. And Mel has a theory.
It's only a theory. So, Children of the Voice, Oracle of the Mighty Gods. I tend to first look at the path. So, we see on the Tree of Life, this is the path from Binah to Tiferet. And there's the theory that the Sephirah Binah, because it's the third of the three above the abyss, the three supernals, Keter, Hakma, and then Binah, that it encapsulates all three of them as a triune force. Mm-hmm. So this path leading from Binah to Tiferet is where the voice comes from, and the children of the voice. So we have that voice being the origin, and then the path going down to Tiferet, the twins. So you see in the Sun card a lot the solar twins. Again, in this card we have twins, or Adam and Eve. So I kind of think of it, the voice of the oracle, that voice in your heart in the Tiferet center, in the heart center, comes from above, from the three supernals. And I think it's trying to get at something to that regard.
Yeah, and I wonder if, in terms of it being an oracle, if that has something to do with divination, and Mercury being a divination god and the ruler as well of Gemini, and the ruler as well of Gemini. Okay, what do you think? Should we do Kabbalah first, since we already just mentioned it? Should we jump in there, and then what do you think?
Sure, if you want.
I actually don't have a ton of Kabbalah material for the Lovers, but we can talk about, first of all, the Hebrew letter Zayin, which means, of course, sword. And wow, the sword imagery, it just keeps on going in these cards. So,
well, I think it's one thing that's interesting is that the letter itself looks like a sword.
Yes,
if
it does.
you look at it, it's totally sword-like in shape.
That it is. And there are swords forming an arch and sort of the top of the card overhead, over the priest figure and over the couple.
Right, in the Thoth version.
Mm-hmm, in the Thoth version.
Yeah, and I've heard that that's a reference to the ceremony of marriage that you often see in royal and military families, where they get married, they pass through an arch of swords.
Oh, yeah.
On their way to the ceremony. They pass under this.
Right. Sort of a
military,
triumphal arch.
Yeah.
There's like 8 or 9 or 10 of them. I don't know. But actually, that's reminiscent because, of course, 8, 9, and 10 of swords are associated with Gemini, and Gemini is associated with the Lovers, but we'll get to that later. This is kind of implied, but in the Weight card, this is Angel Raphael of the Flaming Sword. He hasn't got his sword there, but Isn't it Raphael who has the flaming sword when he drives them out of Eden?
Well, maybe it is, but I actually question whether that's Archangel Raphael.
Oh, really?
Or even an angel at all. The reason I say that is you see various different authors saying, well, it's Raphael. No, well, it's Gabriel. Oh, no, well, that's Michael, right? But nowhere do you see Waite say what it is. I don't believe we do anyway. You can look in the pictorial key and see, but...
Yeah, he just says great winged figure. Although, I mean, it's supposed to be Raphael who was the one at the garden, wasn't it?
There's another thing that I think it could be, though. If you look, so, Waite was a Golden Dawn man. If you look in the Golden Dawn, I think it's in the big brick, the Golden Dawn brick book, there's a diagram that is called Eden Before the Fall. And I think that this card is a picture of Eden before the fall. And in that diagram, it shows the Adam and Eve figures on the Tree of Life. And at the very top of the tree, rather than seeing the three supernal figures, you see one winged feminine figure with a sun and a moon glyph. And that's supposed to be the neshama, the divine feminine.
Oh, yeah.
That is Bina as the three supernals that we talked about earlier. I think that this feminine-looking angel-like figure is actually a representation of that figure of that represents the three supernals in the Tree of Life diagram called Before the Fall. Eden Before the Fall, I think it's called.
Is it like an altar diagram, or is it, I mean, it's just
It's
something
a teaching diagram. I
see.
forget for which grade it is, but it's also sometimes called the Ama, the fertile mother of Binah, but it's her as all three Sephra combined. So it kind
So
of
that
goes
could
back.
be with the sun at the top of the tree shining over the winged figure that represents all three.
Right,
something
and
like
there is the sun in this card, which it could be a Tifa reference, but
True.
it could also be that figure, the sun and the moon. Now, there is no moon there, but there's this cloud under it.
Yes.
And there's something about the cloud that makes sense. But it also, a cloud could be a lunar reference if you...
It could be. I
wanted
thought
to
it was
think
just
of
a
it that
reference to
way.
air because Gemini air.
Yep.
But it's one way of looking at it. Anthony Lewis, Tony Lewis, the astrologer, says that there's a tradition of Raphael, if it's Archangel Raphael, being a Christianized symbol of Eros. So, he's fulfilling the same function as the Eros over there. And he's considered an archangel of healing and matchmaking. If it were Archangel Raphael, though, that would kind of emphasize the connection with Temperance down the road, with the angel of Temperance, who is thought to be Michael or Michael. And just to review, the other ones in the Wade Smith deck are thought to be, so Raphael, angel of the east in the lovers, Michael, angel of the south in the temperance card, Gabriel, angel of the west in the judgment card, even
blowing the
though
horn, Gabriel blowing the horn, yeah.
even though judgment is fire, and Oriel in the devil card, the earth angel or fallen angel. But that mythology is pretty tangled. But if you want to go looking for 4 angel cards, they're in there.
We could say that, and I think maybe we'll also put that diagram up that we're
that's a good
referring
idea.
to up on the website so that you can see that diagram and decide for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, what else have we got here for Kabbalah?
Well, I don't see any more specific sword references unless you want to consider just very abstractly the fact that for every sword there is a sheath, so to speak.
Well, yes, and there is the 2 twins at the base of the Thoth card. There's a chalice and a lance.
Right.
So, you need to have them both.
Right. And the message of this card is said to be to analyze and synthesize. So divide first, whatever your situation, your thoughts are, you're considering into each of the separate parts. And then this is getting a little into alchemy. And only then do you place these disparate parts into the alembic and let them ferment and synthesize into the next step of the equation.
I think that if we want to go into the astrology stuff next, that's well reflected in the connection with the sign of Gemini, the doubleness of the mind. Yeah, so Gemini...
Crowley says about this card that in the formulation of any idea, it creates its contradiction.
Nice.
And he says to also see Atu-1, which is the Magus, the Mercury, the ruler of Gemini.
Right.
And there's some of that inherent contradiction of ideas that we talked about when we talked about the role of the ape of Thoth to follow the Magus and remind him of the inherent twistiness of the word.
Yes, exactly. And in terms of the decans associated with the lovers, we've got the 8, 9, and 10 of swords, all Gemini cards. And I was saying to Mel, I can't look at them without laughing. They're
Over the top.
It's just so much drama.
As I said, woe is me.
And I think it's very interesting to consider in the light of this being associated with the Lover's card, because people think of the Lover's card as this intensely positive somehow card, but there's so much more to the story than that. So let's look a little bit at those minors and see if we can get to why it doesn't work out the way you think in these minor cards. So the very first card is the 8 of Swords, the first decan of Gemini.
The quote-unquote best of the 3.
Probably because it's Jupiter in Gemini,
exactly.
The greater benefic. And, and so the 8 of Swords is known as the Lord of Interference or the Lord of Shortened Force, which I think is such a great name. So we have the Wheel of Fortune up against the Lovers. And you would think with two cards like that, it would be awesome, right?
You would think.
Yeah, but it's almost as if they're tangling with each other rather than...
Yeah, the 8 really surprises me too, because you'd think in Hode that the lovers would be comfortable.
You would
and
think
yet
so.
there's still a blockage there.
Yeah.
I guess because it's lower down and off center of the tree, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I mean, I sort of think that the story here has to do with... I mean, the act of choice that's implied in the Lovers and the notion of fate that's implied in the Wheel of Fortune do not sit easily together.
That's true, right?
You know, I think of this as fate versus fortune. And, you know, on your card in the Tabula Mundi, it's so perfect because I always thought of it as the snagged bobbin, like in a sewing machine.
Yeah, it does look like that.
Like, you know, the idea that you're going along and then things get stuck. And in your card, you have the wheel and the thread of the wheel wrapped around it. And, you know, they're both, the two figures are pulling on it. So I think that there's, you know, with this card, you always have this feeling of frustration that you can't do the thing that you want to. And sometimes I tell people, you know, it's like a virus, just wait it out. You know, it's a sense of paralysis.
And the way out is also to use your mind.
Use your mind. Yeah.
And, you know, puzzle it out. It may not be fast as you would like.
Well, it's interesting thinking of the Lovers as a sword. It's almost like you have to cut through the ropes, you know, of the Wheel of Fortune, instead of allowing them to get you further and further caught up. And it's interesting to think of that first decan of Gemini as the moment where things are split into two, you know, where your perception opens up into like black and white.
Right.
And
like I have on the card, the male and the female, the lunar and the solar.
Yeah, exactly.
The dual nature.
And that perception of being able to perceive that is a gift. So, you know, if you think about the Lovers as having maybe something to do with the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you know, or that moment in Eden where your eyes are opened, it's almost like you're taking in the information. It's Jupiter. There's so much information. You're flooded with these binaries and the knowledge of good and evil and shame, and you cannot focus. You know, so for me, often this turns out to be a card of distraction as much as
there's
it
the
is.
expansion of Jupiter, but it's all at once, kind of.
It's all at once, and it's, you know, scattered and you know, and shortened force. So it's, you know, you have the force, but it can't go anywhere. It's not.
But ultimately, you know, because of the Jupiter nature, there's, you know, ultimately, if you persevere, you can get through it.
Yeah, and I think there's sort of a little bit of a sense of that in the weight card, the idea that nobody's guarding you.
Right.
You know?
She's very loosely bound. She could easily wriggle out of that.
You're not going to hurt yourself. Yeah. Whereas, you know, we get to the 9 of Swords is Mars in Gemini, you know, the lesser malefic. And it's already starting to feel like, you know,
very harsh,
very bad news, right? It's the Lord of Despair or the Lord of Cruelty.
You know, I kind of think of it as, you know, in the one card, in the weight card, it shows the person looking like they're waking up from a nightmare. And in the other Crowley card, we've got the swords dripping venom and blood. In one of my own decks, and it's the Rosetta deck, the swords are the, you know, kind of like symbolically the teeth of this gaping mouth.
Yeah.
And there's the mouth reference for the jaws of Dis, the Mars, the tower, the mouth reference. Yeah. And also like that voice in your head that says cruel things, you know, that tells you you're no good. That keeps you from sleeping. That tells you things are horrible and that you're horrible or you know, says just
all your demons.
Words of despair and cruelty.
Yeah. I think
and Gemini being associated with talking and voice, so.
And again, this theme of the Lovers being associated with the sword. So we use the sword to cut the ropes of fate in the 8 of Swords, and in the 9 of Swords, we're turning it on ourselves or something. So I'm going to read, this is so great, in 36 Faces, which is Austin Coppock's book, which I obviously love because we talk about it all the time.
I love it too. It's great.
It's great. So he talks about this decan as again, these themes of twinning in Gemini, which we see throughout, the joys and horrors of duality, he says. But specifically when you talk about Mars's rulership of this decan, or Mars in this decan, he has a separate section where it says, Mars in this decan is excellent for curses whose object is to destroy a person's reputation. A talisman impressed with Mars in this face would quicken the tongue and the mind, especially for strategic purposes. Sharp. However, when worn, it is likely to reduce empathy and may stress the nervous system. So we have the speed of Mercury who rules Gemini, but in this, kind of toxic, cruel way,
It's interesting also that of all the nines, this is the only one that's, really negative. All the nines are usually, the middle pillar, very balanced.
Yeah.
But somehow the subconscious force of the moon and Yesod kind of doesn't jibe well with the mental faculties, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, even in the weight card is a little bit more negative. It's got the guy with the Band-Aid on his head for the Nine of Wands. Sorry, so there's it's strength,
I suppose you
but
could
it's
think
a
of
defensive.
That,
broken.
You could think of it as that
veteran strength.
I'm thinking of it more from the Thoth perspective,
which is this wonderful card of strength generally.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think of nines as being sort of the suit reaches its peak potential.
Penultimate.
Yeah, the penultimate. It's sort of like the moment before overripeness, before turning your attention to the next generation and recycling the energy of the suit. There's something about this mental process in the swords journey that leads to overthinking and fanaticism, which we see in the Ten of Swords, that sort of like, I've thought myself into a corner. I can go no further. So in the Thoth card, the card of ruin, you have the, as you so often do in 10 cards, you have a tree of life. Whereas you have in the, in the 10 of discs, you have both in the weight and Thoth, you have this sort of abundant tree of life or wealthy tree of life. And in the 10 of cups, you have it sort of spilling forth. In the 10 of swords, the swords are wrecked. They're just like
they're broken,
tied in knots.
They're ruined.
Yeah.
Woe is me.
Yeah. I mean, you still see the image of the tree, but it's a distorted, broken image. And then, of course, the Wade card. Oh, my God. So here's our Sir Thomas More. It's supposed to be, I've heard, the martyr making the sign of benediction in his right hand, lying face down, face planted with, in porcupine mode, his 10 swords stuck in his back. This card, I always make a point of showing it to people before I do a reading and saying, I don't want you to be surprised by this, and explaining some of the meanings it might have other than homicide.
Right. I like that, the whole darkest hour before the dawn.
Yeah.
And they both have a kind of glimmer of sun in the background. And they're both, it's the sun in the decan, and it's right before the renewal of the solstice, the high point.
Yeah.
So it is kind of like the dark point before that high point.
It is. So the sun, the sun is the ruler of the decan, the third decan of Gemini.
Right.
And then that's the last decan right before the first decan of Cancer, in which the summer solstice
which is the card
falls.
of love.
Which is the card of love.
Right. So there's a sense of hope on the horizon, if you will, after all has degraded and seemingly hopeless as could be. There's a light
and maybe there's also a sense that, the sun does not do well in the sign of the twins, in the sign of division and duality, because the sun is this sort of singular
so
force.
Interesting though, because the sun
then
itself has
twins.
the solar twins and the association with Mercury.
Well,
so you would think that it could be compatible.
This is something that there's always in these twin myths an implied death of one of the twins. So like, Castor and Pollux,
Cain and
Abel, right. So I think that's what we see in here, the idea that one of them must go, or that you have to make a choice in the lovers. And this is the moment of the loss of those other possibilities.
Something has to end. Something has to come to an end.
And that's also with the lovers. It seems compatible to me with the twin imagery. The idea that we have twins repeated in various forms in both of these cards.
In the Book of the Law, there's a great quote that reminds of this card. It says, I think it's Nuit speaking, saying, "For I am divided for love's sake, for the chance of union."
Right. And this is the part where they cleave apart with the sword and then come together again in temperance, right?
Yeah. And temperance is the sense of tempering the forging of the sword.
Right. When the sword is plunged into the whatever, icy water.
The fire and water meeting.
And we actually have some pretty compelling references to all of that in the Thoth card, where there's that figure, hovering over them, and I can't remember whether Crowley actually says that it's the hermit, but there's definitely some connection with that figure in the hermit.
Yeah, he's supposed to be the hermit, and he's also supposed to be associated with, so we have all three alchemical elements here. We have the hermit as fixed Mercury, alchemical Mercury, and then we have the emperor and empress as the two figures below, as sulfur and salt. So you have the triune
acting together
chemical symbolism here.
Right, and the hermit, of course, is associated with Virgo, ruled by Mercury, and so we have all three of them together.
The hermit in this card also, if you notice his hand gesture.
Yeah.
So in the original Golden Dawn Book T descriptions of the cards, it's funny, they mentioned that there above that with the lover's figure, there's supposed to be a third figure, and they say in the sign of Osiris risen. But that's not what this sign is and what Crowley's doing here. That's the sign of entering, Horus, the sign of entering, like projecting creation outward. And neither is that sign of Osiris risen, which is the arms crossed across the chest. In Waite's card, the angel there has its arms outspread. So I just thought that was interesting that neither of these cards uses that traditional posture that's described in Book T.
That is interesting. So the sign of the Emperor being the one where you have your hands up by your ears and then you sort of
push them out forward. Yeah.
Through, probably the pentagram in the lesser banishing ritual. The pentagram, we do that, right? Okay.
And it's also possible that the hermit isn't making the sign of the Emperor just because his body posture seems a little more static than that, and rather than thrusting forward so much. So it occurred to me that it could also be the sign of, rending the veil. So there's the sign of spirit, where spirit active is you start with your hands together and then open them apart like you're parting a curtain, and you end with your hands kind of in the position that he has there, which makes sense to me in the sense of the sword and the parting, the rending of the veil, the division, the idea of dividing something in order to activate spirit and create this this division being a stage.
Yeah, the Lover's card has this, real theme of differentiation. Yeah. Cell division. Vive la différence. Okay. And I also think it's kind of just interesting that because we're facing head on and looking at him through head on doing that sign, it puts such an emphasis on the arms, which are associated with Gemini.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
And another thing to notice is that his hands are actually over the heads of the two figures, as if he's blessing them in the marriage ceremony, in a sense.
Yeah, I can see that. And also hand Yod hermit.
And then there's the Mobius strip that's around his arms.
What is that? Why?
Well, I don't know exactly, but I think I read it might have been Thoth that it said that it's the twisting of the supernal words.
Really? So beyond our comprehension as they come to us, something like that. There's also above the head of the hermit or hooded figure, there's it's interesting. There's a little Cupid or Eros, which is of course a reference back to the one that you see in the Marseille, some versions of the Marseille deck, where he's pointing his arrow towards one of the women that the lover is choosing between, but also bow and arrow, reference to Sagittarius, reference to temperance again.
So the axis of Gemini, Sagittarius being opposite signs, and thus having relationship.
And the Lovers and Temperance having that relationship of divide and coagulate.
The Cupid or Eros figure is also a Mercury reference as well, because that's the son of Aphrodite and Hermes.
Okay, good.
So
good.
Hermes being a Mercury.
Yeah. Right.
Mercury figure. And then if you look at the arrow is kind of pointing off as if from Keter to Hakma.
Yes.
Another supernal reference that is supposed to be indicative of the first yod in the divine name is supposed to be mainly in Hakma, but the very tip of the letter, it's like a little flame-shaped letter, is supposed to reside in Keter. Huh. So there's
it could also, same vector as Binah to Tiferet.
Right.
Stretch, but that's what we're here for.
And then there's the whole downward arrow from there, and then do you see at the bottom of the card, there's a bow. Underneath the Orphic egg, there's a bow, and then the lance is symbolically the arrow of that bow, and it's pointing upward. So again, you have the upward arrow and downward arrow symbolism, and it's another reference to, I think, the Temperance or art card.
I can see that. And while we're on that alchemical reference, we should probably talk about the red line and the white eagle. Pity we're kind of giving the Wade Smith Lovers short shrift, but it just doesn't have as much of that stuff.
Actually, there's one thing in the Wade Smith card that we didn't talk about yet, and those are the two trees. I mean, obviously the one on the left is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and the one on the right is the tree of life. So we didn't talk much about that, but I think it's also that those two trees and the positions in the card are indicative of the pillars of severity and mercy, the pillar of mercy being for the tree of life and the pillar of severity being the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And that's on Eve's side, you notice.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And it's interesting that the tree of life itself, it's got 12 flames on it of a sort. I've seen them referred to as fruit, but they really do look like flames, and when we see 12 we always think of the zodiac. Kind of wish it were 10. So it could be a 10, a tree of life with 10
I
fruits.
actually saw, I think it was in Wang's book, he refers to the tree of life as having 14 emanations, not on this. He wasn't referring to this card. He was he had this other diagram of the tree of life, and it had 14 emanations, I guess you'd call it, but it was 7 were above and 7 were below. So the roots had 7 and the upper part had 7. And what that diagram showed was that it was the sun with the other planet, the 6 planets are making the seven planets, and that they were reflected on the bottom of that as being
7 palaces of Asiya?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So anyway, but that's another thing it could have been, but it was not.
Yet another reference to temperance, maybe very, very well blinded, as they say.
So we could still talk about the alchemical
lion and the eagle.
That's one more thing.
So the red line, of course, which we'll see again in 2 episodes. The red line is the refined version of the green line. The idea that you work on the natural material of the green line to create this next stage, the red line. And we have the white eagle. So the red line represents the fire element and the white eagle represents the water element. Do we also see
you
them
could
as...
also say lunar and solar as well.
Lunar and solar.
Or positive and negative, or love under will.
Or blood and gluten.
Yes.
Or Leo and Scorpio, I guess. Do we do that with this? I mean, it is fire and water.
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah.
I don't really think of them that way myself, but I could see how that could be.
Yeah, I mean, we see the white eagle also. One thing I didn't really look into is what the white child on the left is holding. Is that roses? White roses?
Roses, and the other one's holding a club.
Oh, okay, phallic reference.
The lance and the club on one side, and the cup and the roses on the other.
Okay, well,
so
that's
more
not
male,
obvious
female. Yes.
Right. Okay, and then we have our cosmic egg.
We do indeed.
which we have to have every time.
Right. I think it's more of that reference for, you divide up things and then you put them in the vessel. And then, so the egg is the vessel that they go into to ripen. I think Crowley says, know your polarities and then let them rest, or something to that effect. Comprehend your contradictions, which again speaks kind of to the old theme of this card is choice.
Yeah. It does. I mean, and the mental cutting away of the options. And also, there's so many myths of twins that go with this, like Cain and Abel, the idea that Abel had to be slain, or that Cain slew Abel as a sort of, there's always one twin that gets eliminated when there are twins in the sort of mythical story. And Castor and Pollux.
Wasn't Cain I read somewhere, I don't know if it was Crowley or if this is the traditional thing, that Cain was the child of Eve and the serpent.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
Rather than Eve and Adam, the other child.
Maybe.
Don't know.
Okay.
I read that somewhere. I think it might have been Crowley's writings.
And we also have the myth of Castor and Pollux, where Castor was the mortal one and Pollux was the immortal one.
Yeah, yet another.
And when Pollux
Gemini
dies,
reference,
then Castor gives up his immortality and they both go.
So for those listeners who don't know, that's in the constellation of Gemini, Castor and Pollux, the stars are there in that constellation.
And did you know they were actually not just twins, but quads? Apparently, Leda also had Helen and Clytemnestra, which was also, not the happiest story.
No, not really.
Let's see.
Another thing that we could talk about when it comes to the path is I always like to look at so we've talked about the opposite signs, Sagittarius and Gemini, and that axis, Temperance and the Lovers, but also the opposite path. Now, I use the Thoth attribution, where the opposite path to this is that other diagonal coming out of Tiferet and going up to on the other side, which would be the star card. And so if you think, okay, so what ties the star card to the Lover's card? Where can you see any parallels or opposites? And the one thing that I notice is that so in the star card, you also have the lunar and the solar forces as she's pouring from the golden cup and the silver cup. So to me, that was an interesting just kind of one way to think on it.
If you're talking about that path, now you oblige me to do the other version of it, which is the Emperor, of course, would be the alternate version of that path. It's either Emperor or Star on that opposite diagonal from Tiferet to Chokmah. And since I haven't given this even 5 seconds thought, I will try and wing it. But I guess if there were to be parallels, I mean, you can look at the red eagle of the Emperor as sort of appearing again in the Lovers. And we also have what am I going to say? I'm just thinking if there's any sort of obvious way to relate them. Well, whether or not you use the Emperor or the star there, you're still using the attribution of Hey, correct?
That's correct.
Right?
Yeah, either way.
So you have Hey, the window.
Hey, either way.
And you have Hey, the window on one side, and you have Zion, the sword on the other. And that could be yet another, male-female reference.
I guess, yeah.
We could go there.
There's that, yeah. Yep. I still think the star fits better there, but that's just my personal preference. So we'll
takes all kinds.
That'll be the one thing through all this we agree to disagree on.
Yes. Well, we'll probably have, if we ever get to courts, I'm having sort of a crisis of attribution in the courts, so we'll have to talk about that later.
I can't wait.
Okay.
I think another thing that's interesting to note about either of these cards is that this is the first card on the Fool's Journey where he relates to another figure. It's the first card with more than one figure on it, although Crowley says the ape in the Magician doesn't count because he is but a shadow. So this is actually the first card with more than one actual figure. So here the Fool meets the other.
Yes, meets and sees. And smells, because this is associated with the sense of smell. Which,
yes.
that's, I thought was kind of interesting.
You smell. Other people mean smell.
Well,
sorry.
So that's okay. That's a Kabbalistic thing, I think, because the way it worked was that the five senses are implied in the single letters. So, for example, with the emperor, we had the sense of sight. With the Hierophant, we had the sense of hearing. And with the lovers, we have the sense of smell, which just makes sense because of the air reference.
Although I think it should be, I wish it was hearing, because of the children of the voice and hearing. So for smell, it always makes me think of the limbic brain and the way that smell can trigger thoughts and memories. So this being a card of the mind, Gemini, an air card, perhaps that's also appropriate.
That's what I was thinking, exactly.
It's also the first mutable sign we've encountered
That's
so
true.
far in our journey. So Gemini, we've done Aries, we've done Taurus, a cardinal sign and a fixed sign. This is the first mutable sign we've come to. So if anyone's listening isn't already aware what those modalities are, so cardinal signs occur in the beginning of the season. So every season of the year is divided up into, portions. The cardinal signs are the inrush, the beginning energy. They're initiating the force of the sign or of the season. Where the fixed signs are the linchpins, the very solid and stable energy at the middle of the season, and then the mutable signs where the energy has sort of refined itself, perfected itself, and is then moving away.
Should I tell my story of the cardinal, mutable, and fixed and the boulder? Do you know that story?
No, I don't know that
my God,
story.
It's a great story. So there's three people walking down a road: a cardinal, a mutable, and a fixed. And
is this like a joke, like three people walk into a bar?
I've got one of those for you later. Great. Okay. And they encounter a giant boulder which has fallen into the road. What do we do? So the cardinal person has like a, tackle and gear and like pythons or however you say that, and is totally psyched about this enormous challenge that's just interposed itself in his journey. So he throws his grappling hook over the boulder, jumps over to the top of the boulder, jumps down, yoo-hoo, and he's over, and he's gone. Okay, the fixed, let's call him a Taurus, why don't we? The fixed gets a giant drill and a crew of 17 people and drills a hole through the rock.
It takes you, baby.
It takes 7 years, but eventually there's a hole in the rock, and through he goes. And then there's the mutable. The mutable is our favorite because we're both mutables. The mutable just walks around. So
that sums it up nicely.
That's pretty much it, yeah. So the idea being with mutable energy that you just move on. You're all about the closure and getting to the next place.
Wrap up one thing and what's next? It's always what's next.
It's always what's next. You are a mutable married to a fixed, and I am a mutable married to a fixed, and there are definitely some patterns with that.
Yes,
Let's go. Come on.
It reminds me of that cartoon with, do you ever see the big bulldog and the little dog, and the little dog's running circles around the bulldog saying, come on, Spike, come on, let's go. Come on, Spike. We're good. Let's go. And he just stands there.
Okay, let's see.
Well, we've done alchemy.
Numbers I'd like to talk about a little bit.
Yeah, yes, there's some things we can say about numbers.
Well, first of all, number 6. How great is number 6?
Great.
Right?
A Tiferet reference.
Tiferet reference,
yes.
And the union of fire and water.
Right. So if you look at the 6-pointed star, it's got the upright triangle and the downward facing triangle.
And for those who don't know,
merging together,
the upright
lovers.
triangle is the symbol of fire, and the downward triangle is the symbol of water, and you put them together, and there you have the Star of David, the symbol of union between fire and water.
And it's also a reference to, so the downward triangle is a symbol of Binah, and this is the path from Binah to Tifereth, from the mother to the son.
Yeah.
So the sun being the upward triangle and the mother being the downward triangle.
And the mother also being the daughter. So there's like that.
Yep, there's that
whole parallel thing going on there. And also what's kind of interesting is to consider in that light the idea of the devil as a parallel card. Devil number 50, reflecting number 6. If you reduce 15, turns into 6. And of course, there are these amazing parallels, especially in the Wade Smith deck, between the
imagery.
Lovers.
Both decks actually have the two figures.
That's right.
Although Crowley does it in a very phallic way.
Because he's Crowley!
Which we'll find out when we get to the devil.
In several weeks. Right. And the Wade one, where they're explicitly mirrored with the same sort of angelic figure above and the people below.
Oh, one thing we didn't really mention, I think, in Crowley's card, the two figures at the top of the card. So we have Eve and Lilith. Did we talk about those?
We haven't yet, but that's a really good... It's almost sort of a carryover from the Marseille, the idea of choice, Lilith being the first wife. And Rachel Pollack, whose wonderful talk on the Raziel Tarot I was just listening to earlier today, nearby here, she says that she was just telling that story of how Lilith was the first wife and she refused to submit to Adam. She would not lie down and allow Adam to be on top, and she just left. And so, and thereby becoming an icon of feminism for generations to come. So we can also think of those two figures as the choice that Adam makes, if we're going to look at it from Adam's point of view.
And I've also heard them referred to as, Eve being the force of taming love, whereas Lilith is more untamed sex. And then I've heard also that they are both Amma and Ama. So Ama is the fertile mother, which would be Eve, and Lilith would be Amma, the barren mother.
Interesting.
And the difference between those two words is the letter I, which is the yod. The yod makes the mother fertile. From the barren mother to the fertile mother.
And there is the myth that if a man, lies with someone who is not his wife, or even thinks of someone who is not his wife while having sex with his wife, he creates demons and
succubus mythology.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of incentives to not step out. There's also, there's another numeric reference which is kind of interesting in that Zion is actually the 7th letter, since we started with 0 going up to 6, and that actually means that it's the 7th letter. And there is a reference in the pictorial key that Waite wrote. He says that, I think it's almost the first thing he says in the Lovers section. He says, it's the last thing he says in the Lovers section. In a very high sense, the card is a mystery of the covenant and Sabbath. So there's this idea of the Sabbath wrapped up in this card, the 7th day, the 7th letter, and the idea in Judaism that to make love or to have sex on the 7th day, on the Sabbath, is a holy thing. It's something you're supposed to do.
Okay.
Supposedly.
When you said 7 in reference to this card, the first thing that popped into my head is when you look at an astrology chart, the 1st house and 7th house axis, the 7th house being the other. And this is where the Fool first meets the other on his journey. Exactly.
That's right. Right. 7 having a particular value in systems of 12. By the way, we didn't talk about the fact that there is the lion and the serpent.
Is there really?
Yeah, I don't know. This is David Hull's. We always kind of take David Hull's observations with a grain of salt, but you can't see it here. Here, see. So look, there's like
the actual card.
The more you look at it, the more it kind of
we have a little.
We actually have the actual cards here,
printout of the card, and it wasn't. I couldn't see it in that, and
you can't see here. I'm going to circle it for you.
I looked at that. I don't see it.
Here is the serpent has its mouth wide open. It's like biting.
Okay, it doesn't really look.
It's not very well drawn, but
I don't buy it, but okay. Anyway, what do you want to say about it? Or what does David Hulse have to say about it?
I don't know. I think it's just, the serpent is another form of the eagle of Scorpio. And if we're talking Scorpio here.
But why would we have Scorpio in this card?
No, I mean, just Leo Scorpio thing from the lion and the eagle. If we're going with that, I know you would rather it be Leo Aquarius, but there's the Leo Aquarius is nice because it's opposites. Leo Scorpio, it's fixed opposite elements. So
okay. Sometimes when people interpret the little squiggles in the Waite Smith deck as being something, I don't always think it's actually there.
It's just on the
but
other
it
hand,
could be. Sometimes it is.
Do it that way,
True.
It's like that is not the way I work with fabric, and fabric doesn't fall that way.
Maybe
I don't know.
She just didn't draw very well.
Yeah, that's possible too. One thing I did want to say was
the bees. We've got the bees,
on
the robes of the two figures in Crowley's card from the Emperor and Empress card.
Nice. So that's something that you do in your lover's card, which I love. You bring the Emperor and Empress explicitly together, and I guess that's what he's doing here.
Yes,
I mean,
did he
also?
What he's doing there, I think. Mm-hmm. And bees, I think we might have talked about this in a separate episode, but bees being both simultaneously lunar and solar. Mm-hmm. So bees, they gather their nectar with the sun, but yet they're also lunar in the sense that, 99% of the hive is female. Mm-hmm. All the workers and the queen, and they're ruled by a queen. So they're both. I mean, there's bees. A bee is a lunar and a solar creature. That's why both the Empress and the Emperor can take the bee.
I don't see a bee on the Emperor though, Mel. I see a serpent.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I think those are penises.
Of course they are. Okay.
I mean, they
and I seen something I didn't see before. There's a dove on the cup.
Is there really?
There is, yeah. I think.
Well, why wouldn't there be? There's always a downward dove.
Descending dove. More descending dove. This is probably the third time.
I think so.
Time we've run into that so far. And we're only at the beginning.
That's right. I think we're down
Have we gotten to colors and
I think
scents?
We've gotten to colors. We haven't done colors yet. Right. Okay, colors. So
this is the third sign that we've encountered, and so we're at orange. You can see there's Crowley's card especially, there's a lot of orange because that's the king scale color. Then we have the mauve color, which is, I call this card, the colors of this card, Dunkin' Donuts colors, because we've got the pinky mauve and the orange together. Yeah. And it reminds me of this kind of funny story, and I hope no Geminis will get offended, because you know how we were talking about how the Magus distorts, how words can be distorted. Mm-hmm. And often that's a trait of Gemini, that they can purposely or not purposely exaggerate or just distort the word.
Mm-hmm. They're wordsmiths.
Right, mm-hmm. Wordsmiths. They can twist their words. I know someone who works at a Dunkin' Donuts and often being asked questions by the customers such as, how's the chicken salad? To which the chicken salad at Dunkin' Donuts, now we're never going to get any sponsorship from Dunkin' Donuts based on what I'm about to say, but the employees won't eat it, at least the ones that I've ever met. And when asked, how's the chicken salad, one that I know said that her answer is always, it's very popular.
Nice.
Which it must be, considering they sell gallons of it across the world every day. So it's very popular. So if you're ever at a restaurant and you ask how something is and they say it's very popular, don't get it. Anyway, the colors. So Dunkin' Donuts colors. We've got orange and mauve, and then
I will never look at this card the same way again. And there's also some coffee colors.
And then we've got a yellow leather
Yellow
or something.
Leather.
And then
it's basically the color of a work glove before you've used it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then the princess scale is the mauve, but with gray mixed into it. So it's like a grayish mauve, I guess you would call it. I forget the exact name.
And because it's orange, the primary... Is it orange because of having something to do with Mercury, or it's just because that's the third sign
Well, it's probably not a coincidence.
Yeah, it's sort of when you
That's
say
where
the third,
it falls, So Aries,
Yeah.
we have the red, and then Taurus, we have the red-orange, and then Gemini, we have orange. So going down the
Right.
scale, the king
Right.
scale follows the rainbow through this 12 signs.
but not through the planets and elements
no,
necessarily.
but through the 12 signs.
The
through the
scales
12
have fallen
signs.
from my eyes. The color scales have. I was wondering about. I was actually looking at the chart this morning and saying, where is the rhyme and reason? It should just go red, orange, yellow, and it sort of does, but it doesn't. But it's because it
of
goes
the
through
planets.
12 signs.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
Well,
anyway,
that's good.
the orange in the king scale would be for the sign of Gemini, but orange is also probably not coincidentally a color of Hode and Mercury.
Mercury, that's right. Which is, as we've said, I think with the magician card, that means that on the musical scale, it would be D. It would be the note D because we start with C, which is red, and then we're up to D, which is orange for Mercury, and for the magician and the lovers. Okay, I brought lavender because lavender is associated with Mercury, but the smell that is really supposed to go with the lovers is wormwood. Here you go. Artemisia, as you were saying.
Family, yes.
Well, interestingly enough, Artemisia wormwood was the sort of infamous ingredient in absinthe, correct? And the source of the thujone that caused people to either go blind or go mad or whatever it was that they thought it did, but which didn't actually. It was just that they were drinking so much of it that they had alcohol poisoning. But anyway, so the story with the wormwood is that I tried to use it in my Gemini perfume, which I really wanted to be kind of a light and airy perfume. 1 drop of wormwood went in, and then I said, okay, fine, I will build the rest of this formula on top of this. And I just kept adding stuff to try and make it smell nice. And no matter what I did, I could just smell wormwood. So there you go. I had to start all over again without the wormwood.
It reminds me of a cook that I know who worked in a commercial kitchen, and he had to make a large pot of soup and added too much cayenne pepper to it. And so he decided, he had the bright idea, well, I'll just make it into 2 pots of soup. And it didn't, the pepper was still too strong. So I walked through the kitchen, and this was a commercial kitchen with 12 burners. Every burner on the stove had a giant pot of soup cooking on it because he had tried to thin it, and it was still too hot to serve.
God.
He had 12 huge industrial sized pots of soup going.
This wouldn't be the cook that you're married to, would it?
No, it is not that cook. It was one of his employees.
Wow. Poor guy.
I won't
that
mention
must
it,
have been
but
terrible.
we teased him a lot about that over the years.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what
But
can
anyway,
you do?
wormwood's probably that strong.
Wormwood is that strong.
The
and
cayenne of smells.
I can't think of a way to use it. I mean, do you want some wormwood? Help yourself.
No, I have tons of wormwood growing
right?
in
Yeah.
the garden because
Does it
multiplies.
smell like this?
Yes.
Exactly like that?
Well,
pretty much? Or herbally?
Similarly, yeah, it's very potent. I used to grow another plant in the Artemisia family, Sweet Annie. Do you know that one? And it's very frothy.
I do.
And
I
you
do,
can make
yeah.
wreaths out of
Pretty,
it. But
yeah.
oh my God, I'd get such a headache working with it that it was really potent stuff.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So we've seen a lot of things in this card. We've seen imagery relating to choice. We've seen imagery relating to twins. And I think all of that is very much in line with the way people interpret the lovers. What's always interesting to me is that, people who are relatively new to tarot tend to instantly attach themselves to the idea that this is a romance card, and the longer you've been with tarot, it seems the less that seems to be the case. And you seem to gravitate more towards the issues of choice and division. And interestingly enough, but I also think that over time I've kind of come back round to the idea that the romantic aspect and the sexual aspect and the choice and division and binary aspects, they're all pretty much the same.
Right.
When
Yeah,
you
they're
come
all
right
part of
down for
the
it.
chemical
Yeah.
marriage in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Divide in order to bind.
Divide in order to bind. That's true. I mean, in a way, just in terms of real life, when you have two people, there's that idea of the Platonic idea, is it, of soulmates, where there's, people were originally, a being with eight
twin
limbs,
flame.
The twin flame, and that, you have your separate parts, and then you have to find each other, and then, there's this one correct match for you, or one person who's exactly like your other part, your other half, and I think there is that very sort of dangerous idea that people have, that there's just somebody else that's exactly the right one for you, which is really bad for a lot of people. But I think there's more truth to the idea that we get with separation and division in this card, that you need to be two separate people in order to choose each other, right? Okay, on that cheery note, we, I think, have finished with the Lovers, and we'll see you next time with the Chariot.